You hear these numbers on the news all the time, right? GDP is up, inflation is down, unemployment is, well, it's always complicated. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and make sense of these huge economic indicators. Let's get right into it. So let's start with the biggest question of all. How in the world do you measure the health of an entire country's economy? I mean, it's massive. You've got millions of people buying things, selling things, working. Where do you even begin to get a clear picture?
Well, the best way to think about it is kind of like a checkup with your doctor. A doctor doesn't measure every single cell in your body, right? They check your vital signs. And that's exactly what economists do. They focus on 3 key vital signs that give us a really solid snapshot of how things are going.
Okay, our first vital sign is the big one. You've definitely heard of it. It's the gross domestic product, or GDP. You can think of this as the economy's overall production pulse. It's the broadest measure we've got.
Now, the official definition here is super specific for a reason. GDP is the value of all final goods. So we're talking about the finished car, not the steel and tires that went into it. And maybe even more important, it's everything produced within a country's borders. So a Toyota built in Tennessee, that counts for US GDP. But a pair of Nikes made in Vietnam, that doesn't.
And here's what's so cool about this. There are actually 3 different ways you can measure GDP. You can add up everything that's produced, you can add up everything that's spent, or you can add up all the income that's earned. And the wild part is, because every dollar spent is a dollar of income for someone else, they should all add up to the exact same number.
Let's make this really simple. Imagine a tiny economy, we'll call it Pennville, that only makes pens. Okay? So using the production approach, they produce 10 million pens at $2 a pop. That's a GDP of $20 million. From the expenditure side, people buy $20 million worth of pens. And from the income side, that $20 million in sales gets paid out to workers as wages and to the owners as profits. See? It's all the same 20 million bucks.
But hang on a second. What if GDP goes up, but it's only because all the prices went up? That's not actual growth, is it? That's more like the economy has an inflation fever. So to get a true reading of its health, we need to adjust for that. And this brings us to a super important idea, the difference between nominal and real GDP. Nominal GDP is just the raw number using today's prices, but that can be really misleading. Real GDP is the hero here. It uses prices from a fixed point in the past, a base year. So it only goes up if we are actually producing more stuff. It's the true measure of economic growth.
Okay, look at this simple little economy that only makes hot dogs and baseballs. In 2006, the nominal GDP shot up to $540. Looks incredible, right? A huge boom. But when we calculate real GDP using the old 2005 prices, we see the real value of what we produced was $350. So yeah, we did make more stuff, but a huge chunk of that growth was just because everything got more expensive. And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? A massive 170% growth in nominal terms, but it's still very good, yet much more realistic 75% growth in real terms. That giant gap between the 2 bars, that's the inflation fever we were talking about. This is exactly why you'll almost always hear economists talking about real GDP.
So, GDP is great for measuring the prices of everything we produce, from airplanes to haircuts. But that's not really what most of us are buying on a day-to-day basis. So how do we track the price changes that actually hit our wallets and affect our cost of living?
Well, that brings us to our second vital sign, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. This is the big one when it comes to tracking inflation and the cost of living for the average person.
So how does the CPI work? Well, imagine a big shopping cart, a market basket, filled with all the stuff a typical family buys in a year. Housing is the biggest item in there by far. Then you've got food, transportation, and so on. The government tracks the total cost of the same basket of goods every month. And when that total price goes up, that's inflation.
So with the difference between the inflation measure from GDP, that's called the GDP deflator, and this CPI, well, here's the bottom line. The GDP deflator tracks the prices of everything we produce here at home. The CPI tracks the prices of what we buy, and that includes stuff we import from other countries. They're both useful, they just tell us slightly different things.
Okay, so we know how much stuff we're making, and we know what it costs to live. What's the last piece of the puzzle? Well, it's the people doing all the work, and that brings us to our third and final vital sign, the health of the job market, which we measure with the unemployment rate.
Now, the official definition of unemployed is actually way stricter than you might think. It's not just about not having a job. To be counted, you have to be available for work, and this is the absolute key, you must have been actively looking for a job in the last 4 weeks. If you haven't been looking, maybe you're a student or retired or you just given up, you're considered not in the labor force, and you don't even show up in that main unemployment number.
All right, let's play a little game. Looking at this list, who is officially unemployed? Well, John and Jill are actually considered employed. Rose, the student, and Lucy, the stay-at-home parent, aren't looking for work, so they're not in the labor force at all. That just leaves Leighton, the former athlete, who is actively hunting for a job. He's the only one who fits that strict definition.
Now get ready for a bit of a curveball. The goal of a healthy economy is not zero unemployment. In fact, a healthy dynamic economy always has some unemployment. Economists call this the natural rate. And you might be asking, why on earth is that? Well, it really comes down to 2 big reasons.
First, you've got something called frictional unemployment. This is basically just the normal churn of the job market. People graduate and look for their first job, or they switch careers, or move to a new city. It just takes time to match the right person with the right job, and that short-term search period is totally normal.
And second, there's structural unemployment. Now, this one's a little different. It happens when there's a basic mismatch. For various reasons, like minimum wage laws or unions, wages for certain jobs might be stuck a bit too high. When that happens, you get more people who want those jobs than there are jobs available. It's a structural issue.
Okay, so we've looked at our 3 vital signs: the production pulse with GDP, the cost of living with CPI, and the health of the job market with the unemployment rate. Let's put it all together on our economic dashboard.
When you put these 3 numbers together, real GDP, the CPI, and the unemployment rate, you get a really powerful snapshot. Now, it's not the whole story, of course, but it's the essential dashboard that tells us if the economy is growing, if our money is holding its value, and if people are able to find jobs.
And that brings us to one last really important thought. These numbers are fantastic for measuring the health of the economy, but what about the health of our society? GDP, for example, doesn't care about our free time or the quality of our environment or how fairly income is distributed. So while these tools are powerful, it's absolutely crucial to remember what they don't see. And that's a big thing to keep in mind. Thanks for joining me.